The next holiday that comes chronologically on the Hebrew calendar is actually one that's not mentioned in Leviticus 23, and it is the holiday of Purim. This one is found in the book of Esther. That's the historical background, and that's also biblically where there is a mandate for the Jewish people and those who join themselves to the Jewish people to celebrate Purim. So this one, like I said, it's a little bit different. I don't have as much material on it, but it's still a great holiday to learn about. And it's also a messianic holiday. Even the old traditional Jewish rabbis in their writings mention Purim as being a messianic holiday. So with that, I'm going to just dig in a little bit to the historical background of Purim, which is just a brief overview of the events in the book of Esther. Pardon me, I almost said Exodus. Esther. So the word Purim, if you remember, I think I mentioned this in another teaching, when there's an im on the end of a Hebrew word, that means it's plural. So pur means lot, and Purim is lots. And that refers to the lots that were cast to determine the day that the Jewish people would be destroyed. So I'm going to read to you Esther 3:7. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So here's just a neat little side note about Mordecai and Haman, or as in English we say Haman, but Hebrew it would be Haman. So Mordecai was from the tribe of Benjamin, and we're told that Haman was a descendant of King Agag. King Saul was also from the tribe of Benjamin, and he was told in 1 Samuel 15:3 to completely destroy the Amalekites. But he disobeyed God and he spared the king, which was King Agag, or Agag in English. I tend to revert to the Hebrew pronunciation. That is found in, 1 Samuel 15, verse 8. So Samuel later killed King Agag, but King Agag must have passed his seed on before Samuel killed him, because we find out that Haman is a descendant of this king. So something that's interesting to note is that if King Saul would have obeyed God and completely destroyed the Amalekites, there would be no Haman, no enemy of the Jewish people that we find in the account of Esther. And then in Esther's account in, Esther chapter 9, verse 10, it says, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they. So not only Haman, but all 10 of his sons are destroyed in Esther. So that's just a neat parallel, I thought. We have Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin, we have King Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, and then we have Mordecai's enemy, Haman, who is a descendant of King Saul's enemy, King Agag, who he was supposed to destroy but did not. So that's just an interesting little parallel that we find in the account here of Esther. Now, the account of Esther takes place after the first dispersion of the Jewish people to the land of Persia in about 450 BCE. The Jewish community survived and flourished under the Persian leaders. Haman rose to power and he wanted to exterminate the Jewish people, and that's found in Esther chapter 3. And then in Esther chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, we see Mordecai encouraging and challenging Esther with these words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That's such a powerful passage that, God wants to use us, and he wanted to use Esther, but had she chosen not to obey, God would have, risen up someone else to deliver the Jewish people. So that's just very encouraging, not just for Esther, but encouraging words for us as well. And then I'm just skipping over a lot of this here for the sake of time, because you all can read the book of Esther to get the complete, background on this holiday. But Esther 9:20 through 22 says, and Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish among them that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. So, we basically jumped from him encouraging Esther to speak for the king, and we all know, or speak to the king rather, and we all know that she did. I think we all are pretty familiar with the story of Esther. She did speak to the king. Haman was defeated. The Jewish people were given permission to defend themselves on that day, that they were supposed to be destroyed, and we know they did, and this is basically Mordecai sending out the edict that they were to commemorate and keep that day, those 2 days every year, and celebrate by feasting, sending portions one to another, gifts to the poor. So anyway, they were supposed to commemorate the day by doing those things. So, and the rest is history, as we all know. And then one interesting thing I really want to point out is that in Esther chapter 9, 26 through 28, we see that, let me just make sure I don't miss it here on my notes. Okay, I'm going to read you these verses, but first I just want to note that we see in these verses that Gentiles can choose to identify and stand with the Jewish people. So let me just read these passages to you, because I think this is really meaningful, that it specifically points this out in the book of Esther. So I'm going to read Esther chapter 9, 26 through 28. It says, "Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as join themselves unto them." So that's what I want you to get from this. It's all of those. It was the Jewish people, their seed, and all such as join themselves unto them. So as it should not fail that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year. And there's that word appointed time. We mentioned that in the Shabbat, the first in the holiday series, that an appointed time is a Moedim. It's a special time for God to meet with his people. So they were to keep this appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation. So here we see it being, once again, the theme with these holidays is they're to be kept throughout all the generations. They're a perpetual meeting time with God and his people. Every family, every province, every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. So I love that Gentiles throughout the Old Testament, the New Testament, and even today we see that there are always Gentiles who have been called to stand with the Jewish people, to, say, like I said, the heart of Ruth, your God shall be my God, your people shall be my people. And it's just a beautiful picture of coming together as one. Okay, so we mentioned that this really is going to be a shorter teaching, because Purim, it's a meaningful holiday, but there's not as much historical background or scripture to go through as some of the other holidays. Okay, so another thing I want to pull out, just given the historical background of this holiday, is a theme that God watches over Israel. He's faithful to keep his promises. In Genesis 12:3, he said, "I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." And we see that all throughout history, that those who bless Israel will be blessed. And God is faithful. He keeps his promises, and he watches over Israel. And we see that especially in the book of Esther. It was yet another time in history that a corrupt and evil leader plotted to destroy and completely wipe out the Jewish people, but God preserved them. Okay, so the traditional Jewish observance of Purim is so much fun. It's a great family-friendly holiday that is not taken too seriously. It's a lot of fun. So, doesn't start out so fun. Many Jews will observe what is called the Fast of Esther, and this is on the 13th of Adar, which is one day before Purim begins. And what this does is the fast commemorates the day that was chosen by Haman for the Jewish people's destruction, and it goes from sundown to sundown, as all the Jewish holidays do. And it's also a way to honor Esther and Mordecai's 3-day fast, which is found in Esther 4:16. "Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day, I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so I will go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So that's what that fast commemorates. It commemorates Esther's fast and also the day that was chosen for the destruction of the Jewish people. And then synagogues will always have, they typically will always have an evening service at the synagogue on sundown, the night that Purim begins, and it's a big, fun, loud costume party. So everyone dresses in costume, and it does not need to be a biblical costume. It can be any costume at all. So everyone dresses in costume, and then they read through the scroll of Esther, or the book of Esther. And then as they read through that scroll, every time that Haman's name is mentioned, people stomp their feet, boo, make noise. Basically, you just want to drown out Haman's name. And then whenever Mordecai's name is said, everyone cheers loudly. So it's a lot of fun for the whole family. And then they do what is called a Purim spiel, which is a Purim play or a skit. And also then, according to Esther 9:22, that was when it said that they would have feasting and joy, send portions to one another, and give gifts to the poor. So it's also traditional to exchange gifts of food and give to the poor on Purim. And one thing that's very big in Judaism is charity or righteous deeds, or it's called tzedakah. And that's giving to the poor or charity. And then many will have a big meal or feast or party at their home with friends and family. And then a very traditional food to eat is called hamantaschen. And it's basically a little shortbread cookie that has jelly in the middle, and it's folded up in the shape of a triangle to look like a little hat. And so in English, we call it like Haman's hat. But hamantaschen actually in Yiddish means Haman's pockets, or in Hebrew it means Haman's ears. But the general idea is we've beat him, let's eat him. Okay, there is some prophetic significance to Purim and some messianic, like I said, some messianic, prophetic, whatever you want to call it. Just some, not sure what the word, I can't figure out the word I'm looking for, but there's a messianic element definitely to Purim, or like definitely you can see some foreshadowing of Messiah throughout this holiday. So I'm going to read you just a little paragraph from one of my favorite holiday books. I think I showed this to you in another teaching. It's called God's Appointed Times by Barney Kasdan. Okay, so this is what he has to say, or not really what he has to say. Actually, I'm quoting a little bit from him, but he's also quoting some of the Jewish rabbis who wrote in some of the different commentaries that have been put out on the holidays. So this would be quoting from an actual Orthodox Jewish rabbis who do not believe in Yeshua, but they have definitely seen the messianic element to this holiday. So this is a holiday of deliverance and rest from one's problems. Purim was naturally related to the greater day of rest in the days of Messiah. One commentary relates, the patriarch Jacob had longed to institute that every day of the week be like the Sabbath of messianic times, totally saturated with the holiness of that Sabbath. But he was unsuccessful, for it was premature. He was successful, however, in that his descendants would be able to experience some taste of this messianic Sabbath even during the week, at such times as Hanukkah and Purim. Indeed, Purim is a grand reminder of God's plan for his world and how that plan will be implemented through the coming of Messiah. So that was just a little quote from, like I said, an Orthodox rabbi on Purim. Okay, so we already mentioned some of the prophetic fulfillment that we see in Purim, and that is that God is faithful to keep his promises to the Jewish people. And then from Jeremiah 31, verses 35 and 36, that God protects Israel, his chosen people. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinance of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, and when he says those ordinances, he's talking of the moon and the stars, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. So we see in Jeremiah that God has said that Israel will be his chosen people in his nation forever. And that unless the sun, the moon, and the stars all cease to exist, Israel is going to be his chosen nation forever, and he will protect his people. So we definitely see, throughout history, many attempts have been made to completely destroy the Jewish people, but God is faithful to preserve them and keep his promise. Romans 8, verses 35 through 37 says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress, or persecution or famine, or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us." So a major theme and propheticness I see of Purim is that we are more than conquerors, God's people, and I say we, those of us grafted into Israel, and the Jewish people, we are more than conquerors. And God has promised that he will never leave us, or that we'll never be separated from his love. And then this is something interesting. Esther is the only book in the Bible that has no actual clear reference to God. His name is not in that book. However, you can see him working out his perfect plan behind the scenes throughout the whole book. So I just think that's very interesting. And also, I have already mentioned this with Esther, but it's a challenge to us that God uses us to accomplish his will, and he wants us to be available to serve him in his kingdom. So what is the practical application for us as believers? Or how can we adapt if we choose to adapt this holiday or observe this holiday in our homes or in our personal lives? So if you feel led to, or you feel the Spirit, leading you to begin celebrating or observing Purim, I think it's a beautiful thing, especially the fast of Esther. I think that is an excellent fasting. Number one is a spiritual discipline that hardly anyone seems to do anymore, and I include myself in that. I've really been challenged the last few years to begin fasting more, and a great way to do that is I purchased a Jewish or a Hebrew calendar. It's like a Hebrew and English calendar, so it has all of our all of the English months and days and everything like that, but it also has the Hebrew months and days, and it includes all of the biblical holidays. So whenever I see a Jewish fast coming up on the calendar, I try to observe that myself, and I use that day to fast and pray for the salvation of the Jewish people and the salvation of any unsaved friends or family members that I have. So I think the fast of Esther is an excellent time to pray for Israel and the Jewish people. So you may choose to do that, to start observing the fast of Esther, which is on the 13th of Adar. And I want to read you Romans 10:1 says, "Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved." So we can join ourselves in that prayer with Paul for all of the Jewish people to be saved. Another great way to observe Purim is to just read the book of Esther as a family that day. Or if you have children or, lots of younger kids or teenagers and friends that hang out at your home, have them put on a play, have them write and put on a play themselves. It's a lot of fun, and especially teenagers have a lot of fun with that. I know my kids have. You can rejoice in God's protection and his faithfulness to keep his promises. And it's a great way to honor God and honor the spirit of Purim by giving to the poor. It's a great day that you might want to, maybe you want to collect food leading up to Purim and take it to your food bank, or some other charity, you might be able to be involved in. Acts 20:35 says, "I have showed you all things, how that so laboring you ought to support the weak, and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he said, it is more blessed to give than to receive." And if you really want to get into the spirit of Purim, you could invite friends and family over and have a costume party and have lots of food and just have a lot of fun together. There's one other thing. Hold on here. Gotta get my hand out. I was kind of wondering myself a year or two ago, why we dress up on Purim. I think it's a lot of fun to do, but I kind of was scratching my head thinking, okay, it's fun and all that, but why? Why do we dress up on Purim? Or why do, those who celebrate the Jewish holidays dress up on Purim? And then I was reading, when we lived in Savannah, we were members of the Jewish Community Club, and they put out a little newspaper every month. And so right before Purim, the newspaper came out, and it had a little article that I clipped that said, "Why do we dress up on Purim?" And this was taken from Chabad, which is a sect of Orthodox Jews, but it was Chabad.org. So it was their website, CHABAD.org. So why do we dress up on Purim? In contrast to the overt miracles of the holidays of Passover, Hanukkah, and other Jewish holidays, the miracle of the holiday of Purim was disguised in natural events. Here is a sampling of the story. The king wanted his wife to come to a party. She did not want to, and she was killed. Then an evil man, Haman, wanted the Jews dead and plotted to accomplish this with the approval of the king. The king remarried, and his new queen, Esther, happened to be Jewish and arranged for the annulment of the decree. Only after the fact, when one looks at the entire story, does one realize the great miracle that happened, or that transpired. So the custom of wearing costumes on Purim is an allusion to the nature of the Purim miracle, where the details of the story are really miracles hidden within natural events. And then number 2, the Talmud writes that just as the Jews at the time pretended to be serving other gods, God pretended that he was going to destroy the Jewish nation. And in the end, he did not. Rabbi Tzvi Elimelech Shapiro, from 1783 to 1841, known as the Bnei Yisachar, writes that this is the reason we pretend to be someone else on Purim, since both the Jews and God's actions were masked by other intentions. So I'm not sure I get that one, but anyway, that's another reason. Number 3, we dress differently on Purim to minimize the embarrassment of the poor who go around collecting charity on this day, a day when we give charity to everyone who outstretches their hand. And number 4, to commemorate the dressing up of Mordecai in King Ahasuerus' royal garments in the story of Purim. So those are 4 reasons that the Orthodox Jews give for why we dress up on Purim. I like the first one the best, how the details of the story are just hidden in ordinary events. I think that's really cool. The miracles are hidden within natural events. So that's all I have on Purim. It's a shorter, like I said, a shorter teaching because there's just not as much scripture and background to cover. So I hope you learned something about that, and I hope you are challenged to fast and pray for the Jewish people, give to the poor, read the book of Esther, and just when that rolls around on your calendar, just pause and think about how faithful God is to keep his promises. Thank you.